Muslim minorities in the Philippines, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So we call minority or minorities here in terms of number. Yeah, in terms of number, the number of the population, in this case, those identifying themselves as Muslims in these countries where you have either Buddhists, in the case of mainland Southeast Asia, or Christian in the case of the Philippines. So we talk about Muslims in Indonesia and Malaysia, where they are majority in terms of the numbers, and you have minorities there. You know, you had in Indonesia Christians, Catholic Christians, you know, Roman Catholics, Protestant Christians, and you had Hindus, Buddhists, Confucians. In the case of Indonesia, and in the case of Malaysia, you have Hindus, Buddhists, you know, Confucians, and others as well. So that Muslims are majority in Indonesia and Malaysia. We already talked about that last time. So let's move on. Muslim minorities. Some of the characteristics of Muslim minorities in Southeast Asia. First, in terms of fundamental belief and practices, you know, like belief in God, you know, Muhammad was a prophet of God, a messenger of God, and praying, you know, regularly, fasting, performing pilgrimage, giving alms. You have the common features of Muslims everywhere. Either they are majorities or minorities. So you have common values, common beliefs and practices across countries, right? So it's not there is no difference in that. But of course, you have difference in the interpretation and practices of you know, of this belief and rituals according to the cultures. Muslims as minority are quite different from the Muslims as majority in terms of the politics, you know, of identities. You know, what kind of identity or identities that these Muslim minorities want to, you know, struggle for or maintain, either ethnic identity or ethno-religious identity vis-a-vis the mainstream nation or ethnic groups. So in terms of politics and also cultures, Muslim minorities demonstrate some unique features in you know, in comparison to Muslim majorities. One of the efforts that they Muslims do in these Buddhist majority countries or Christian majority country like the Philippines, they have to accommodate, you know, the wider cultures, or integrate themselves into the wider culture, religiously, culturally, politically, or they become autonomous. They are struggling for autonomy, you know, in terms of cultures. In very few cases, you have some struggles for independence, you know, by these minorities against the majority nation state. All right, so you have this efforts and agendas that Muslim minorities are facing. Muslim minorities can and do live peacefully under the rule of non-Muslim authority where religious toleration and plurality are respected. So when the mainstream Buddhists or Christian Filipinos are respecting minorities, Muslim do live peacefully or in coexistence with the other mainstream cultures. In the Philippines, okay, first country we were going to talk about in the Philippines. In the Philippines, Muslim Filipinos struggle with non-Muslim became more intense after the coming of a Spaniard.
I saw him meeting Parker. Parker? Parker is the boss of local gang.
Haixin is in the gang?
No, I heard that he was kidnapped by them.
Kidnapped?
Let me see why we are here noise. Would
Parker,
you mind mute yourself, please?
he knows that Jaheed is a fugitive.
Okay. Just now we can be sure.
那我挖这个河本来想建个桥，你知道为了不要建桥。
Contact the police.
这为啥不说话你？
Take action.
Let's see. All right. Sorry about this issue. I don't know why. I still see unmute among some of the students here, and I can't mute them. So Muslims in the Philippines, they are around 5 to 10 millions, or 6 to 11% of the total population in 2000. And majority are Christians. You also have Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, indigenous believers, and so on. And most Muslims in the Philippines live in Mindanao, Palawan, and the Sulu archipelago. It's called the Moro region. So Moro is for Moor, Spanish Moor. Usually this designation is given to Muslims by the Spanish, and then the Muslim themselves appropriate this term for themselves. So they call themselves the nation of Moro, or Bangsa Moro, or the Moro people, Muslims in this case, in the Philippines. And most Muslim are Sunni rather than Shiite. The Sunni and the Shiite branches of Islam we already talked about earlier, the Sunni, and then you have, in terms of the legal thought, Shafi'i school. Shafi'i is one of the legal school of thought in Islamic tradition. There are also some Ahmadis. Ahmadis, those who believe that Ghulam Ahmad in India was a reformer or a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad. But anyway, you also have Muslim groups beside the Sunni and the Shiite. Historical background a little bit. So traders and missionaries came to the Philippines at least from the 14th century, to the present day even. And through this trade and mission, you have the transmission of Islam in the Philippines. You had Islamic kingdoms in the Philippines, and the Sultan, Sultan, the king, in the Sulu area in the southern part of the Philippines. You also had genealogies linking rulers with Malacca. Malacca was the first kingdom in Malaysia, remember, 15th century. And then Palembang is in Indonesia, Johor in Malaysia. They also had some connection with China, even, you know. So then you have the Spanish came, 16th century, you know, and you had this tension between the Spaniards and Muslim kings. So you had the wars since then. They were engaged in wars. Then you had, this is very brief, okay? Then you have Americans coming to the Philippines, late 19th century. So you have Moro identity was reinforced. The, you know, the ethno-religious identity of being a Muslim before, you know, by the Spanish, and then you have the American coming. So this Moro identity reinforced. Some influential figures in the American administration argued that the U.S. should privilege these traditional leaders, you know, the Sultan, the local Sultan, God's vicegerent on earth, and to promote Islam in order to create a loyal and responsible community. So in other words, now the Americans try to accommodate Muslim local rulers. But at the same time, you also have Christian migrations, you know, because of this colonization. You have Christians, you know, traveling to different parts of the Philippines. You have the Datuk. The Datuk is local or indigenous figures, local rulers in the Sulu. And the Americans, as you see in the picture, they look, you know, they stand side by side. You have a collaboration between the local rulers and Americans. Because of the travels, because of the migration, because of the colonization, you have regional demographic shift in the Philippines. Until the 1950s, Muslims formed the majority of almost every region of the southern Philippines. But after the Republic in 1946, the Philippine government began to sponsor large-scale Christian migration. And by the late 1960s, Muslims in the South, or Mindanao Muslims, found themselves impoverished minority in their own homeland. So you had a dislocation, disparities, you know, because of this demographic change. For example, you have 18 non-Muslims, you know, this number, and Muslims 64%, and then 1970 you have less in terms of the balance. Muslim and non-Muslims, or Muslim in this case Christians, have a demographic shift in the Philippines. As a result of the political conflict, you had the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So you have certain places or regions called, including Basilan, Sulu, Islamic city of Marawi. They become autonomous region in the Muslim Mindanao. And the capital of this region is at Cotabato City. Yeah, you can see here, you know, the map. You have Manila here, the capital of the Philippines, in up to the north, and then you have the south, mostly Muslims, and Mindanao is the main region. Because of this, you have different groups among Muslims, you know, trying to pursue their objectives, different objectives. One of the organizations is the MNLF, the Moro National Liberation Front. This particular Liberation Front was led by the Western educated Nurmi Suari. He graduated from the University of the Philippines. He had some, you know, he received scholarship on national integration. Originally, he was in the underground political front of the Muslim separatist rebellion, but then he signed the Tripoli Agreement of 1976, where you had Muslims and Christians would be given autonomous regional governments, although not really, because there's some things that are not really accomplished. Until today, the government has been willing to negotiate with the Moro National Liberation Front, and MNLF has accepted autonomy in 1996. But you also have more, we call, separatist movement. So MNLF is more, cooperative with the government. MILF, yeah, MILF is not cooperative. They are trying to form a separatist movement, and the the major or main leader of this was Hashim Salamat, 1942-2003. He was second in command of the MNLF before until 1979, but he broke away because he didn't agree with the integration and national integration with the Philippine government. He was educated in Cairo in Egypt, but then he organized a group of peoples and fighters and tried to build a broader popular support and and pursuing a separatist agenda. And they have more Islamic rhetoric in terms of resistance against the national, according to the understanding, infidel government. That's the second group, right? So MILF, separatist movement. But you also have Muslims under the Philippine government, so they are brought into the national governments. So we understand that Muslims in the Philippines are majority Sunni and the Shafi'i, and then they had the Office of Muslim Affairs. So the Philippine government also tried to accommodate Muslim interest by creating an office in charge of Muslim affairs like pilgrimage, schools, endowment, almsgiving, mosque, halal food certification, and others. So this is more like integrationist, front, right? So you have the liberation movement, separatist movement, and this is part of the government. Muslims becoming part of the government. So Muslims in the Philippines have been struggling for different objectives: ethno-nationalism, tribalism, in some cases, Islamic global community. So some of the rhetorics that they build is to bring all Muslims around the world to help and support the autonomous and separatist movement. But they also seek for social justice through autonomy or even independence. All the factors, including the Spanish history, American, colonialism, Spanish colonialism, American colonialism, and then post-colonial states by the Filipino themselves. And then you have Middle East, the influence of the Middle East, and then local ethnicities, the Sulu, the Mindanao, and so on and so forth. All these factors shape Muslim politics of identity in the Philippines. Yeah. At the same time, you have mosques and schools. Of course, it's not as many as, for example, in Malaysia or Indonesia, but still you have different mosques and schools, mostly, of course, private. There are some Islamic schools also supported by the government under the Muslim Affairs Department that I mentioned earlier. These schools, some of these schools have to be accredited by the Department of Education or accredited by foreign bodies like, Islamic organizations, for example, try to support some of the Islamic schools in the Philippines. Muslims and Christians are intense in conflict, in tension, but you also have Muslims and Christians collaborating and building mutual understanding, carrying out different programs, training, workshops, visiting each other's, and so on and so forth. So you have cooperations also in the Philippines. Okay. So Islam in the Philippines, to make it short, is quite complex, historically, politically, right? So it's between integration, independence or autonomy, accommodation, right? A majority-minority relationship. It's very dynamic. At the same time, most Muslim in the Philippines are the Sunni. You also have Shiite, and then you have the Shafi'i school of thought in the Philippines. Let's move on to talk about Islam in Thailand. In Thailand, in a mainstream Buddhist country, Muslims account for 4.5 million, about 7% of the total Thai population, around 60 millions and 90% Buddhist. So it's a minority. It's quite quite significant minority here, 7%. Muslims reside throughout the country, but many Muslims, especially Malay Muslims, reside in the deep south, meaning southern Thailand, including Narathiwat, Patani, and Yalam, together with neighboring Satun and Songkhla. Other Muslims are scattered throughout Thailand. You also have Chinese Muslims, Indian Muslims, Bangladeshi Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, other Muslims coming to Thailand, scattered in Thailand. Historically speaking, you had the kingdom of Ayutthaya. Yeah, this is the kingdom of Ayutthaya in Thailand. And one of the kings, King Songtam, 17th century, this king, Thai king, had this office for like a Sheikh of Islam. Sheikh means the great master or grandmaster, the teacher, the great teacher of Islam. So basically advising the people about Islam. And they had this appointment of Sheikh Ahmad to the office of Sheikh of Islam, Chilaraja Montri, administering Islamic affairs. In other words, the Thai Buddhist kingdom also had an office in charge of some Islamic affairs, like prayer, pilgrimage, some education. Central Islamic Council of Thailand. Also, you have in Thailand, the 5 counselors appointed by the king. They advise the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Interior on Islamic matters. So you have this, accommodation of Muslim affairs in the Thai government. They have been supporting Islamic schools. They also partially fund the pilgrimage, the Muslim pilgrimage, Thai Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And you also have the project of assimilation. The king tried to assimilate the Muslims under the Compulsory Education Act of 1923. Basically, this assimilation project wanted to make all Thai citizens Thai, including the Muslims. In other words, Compulsory Education Act of 1923 tried to assimilate the people, all peoples in the in Thailand to be Thai. linguistically and culturally, and to some extent also religiously, or at least they have to also been taught about Buddhism, even though they are non-Buddhist, for example, in according to this Compulsory Education Act. So the government in early 1920s, 1938, 44, continued to impose Thai Buddhist cultural norms to all the peoples under their rule. By the same time, you also have some dialogue between the king and Muslims, especially Muslim in southern Thailand. The majority of them were Malay Muslims. You had some peaceful decades in Thailand in 1980s, 1990s. So they tried to expand democracy through a dialogue and election of governments. And they tried to be more sensitive to Muslim cultural needs. And some Muslim had been elected or appointed to the parliament. And then you also have some Muslims figures accommodated into the ministries or deputy minister and the Ministry of Interior. And you have one of the foreign ministers, a Muslim, Surin Pitsuwan, from 1997 to 2001. He was a Muslim. He didn't speak Malay, and he became the foreign minister of Thailand. Just an example of how, Muslims, some of the Muslim figures accommodated into the Thai government. So generally speaking, Islam in Thailand, Muslims have generally acknowledged the need to move away from rigid ethnic and religious exclusivism in favor of cooperation and political integration. What it means is that so many Muslims in Thailand want to be part of the mainstream culture through building cooperation and integration. But there are still tension and conflicts, discriminations and injustices, or feeling discriminated, and so on and so forth. That's still happening, but the mainstream situation is that you have more peaceful relations and accommodation and integrations in this Muslim minority country, Buddhist majority country of Thailand. The village imam or Islamic leader and the person responsible for spirit and magic, the indigenous believers, they also play a role in the practice of Islam in Thailand. And interestingly, you also had intermarriages or interfaith marriages between Muslim and Buddhist. About 20% of marriages between Muslim and that's quite interesting in one of the places. It will be very interesting to study this interfaith marriage in this case, a Muslim Buddhist marriage. Politically, Thai-speaking Muslims are more similar to Buddhists in political orientation than they are to their Malay-speaking Muslim counterparts. So in other words, they are politically mainstream, generally speaking. Most Muslims want to be part of the political culture and system in Thailand. Tension and compromises between Thai national building, in which Buddhism becomes, the main element of this national building. Then you have Muslim minorities, either Malay Muslims or Siamese Muslims or Thai Muslims. So you have this tension as well as compromise between nationalism and minorities. Of course, you have different impacts on these tensions, local, regional, global forces. Perhaps one of the things that students can write about is the need for education. What kind of education that you would expect in this situation where you are a minority in terms of numbers, and then you have a Buddhist majority country? What kind of education? Is it entirely Buddhist education, or it is Buddhist and other religious education, meaning Buddhist and Islamic education, Islamic subjects also to be taught in the schools, so Buddhists also would know about Islam and Muslim also would know about Buddhism. So it's like, like what we teach here, teaching different religions in the schools or in the colleges, multicultural education, not only one particular religious tradition, but diverse religious, subjects taught in schools or in colleges and universities. So that's a question, right? What kind of education that you should give to all these peoples, regardless of the religion. Also need to build a peace education. You have a peace building, peacemaking, but also peace education. How to teach about peace in a very diverse culturally and religiously society like Thailand. Mainstream is Buddhist, of course, but you also have Muslims, and surely there's some Hindus and others as well in Thailand. So today, Muslims, I already talked about this, right? So you had that main feature of Muslims in Buddhist majority country of Thailand. The third country I would like to talk is Burma or Myanmar. In Myanmar or in Burma, Muslims are dispersed geographically and diverse in ethnicity, religious practice, socioeconomic background, and political integration. Just like Muslims in Thailand, you have this diversity. They also have different attitudes and responses to national culture. Historically, Muslims have often been the target of violence, especially under the military government that has ruled since 1962. But then you also, have different attitudes toward this violence. Different peoples responding differently. There are at least 4 groups in Burma or Myanmar: the Rohingya, the Pantai, Chinese Muslims, the Malay, and then you have all other immigrants from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and others. And there is the 5th group, Burmese Muslim, Burmese ethnically and Muslim religiously. So Rohingya is an ethnic group, mostly Muslims. The Pantai, the Chinese Muslims, the Malay, the South Asian Muslims from Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, and you also have Burmese Muslims. So you have different groups, at least 4 or 5 groups here. Muslim are around 4% of Burmese, 50 million people. Historically speaking, Islam reached Burma as early as 8th century. That's it's a story. It's not based on historical or archaeological evidence about 8th century. But anyway, at least 14th century, 15th century, you have Islam. Remember, we talk about the Islamization of Southeast Asia. 14th century is the one that we had evidence, right? Historical evidence or archaeological evidence. But this is according to local stories. Islam had become or had reached our place since the early time, 8th century. You also you had Arab, Persian, Indian Muslim traders coming in. Some Muslim often serve as the administrators to Burmese kings, and you also have intermarriage between Indian, Bangladeshi Muslims and Burmese. So you had mixed blood as the outcome of this intermarriage. Again, Burmese nationalism and Buddhism are very closely interwoven, like in Thailand. But at the same time, they try to incorporate Muslims, although you have some cases of denial, of citizenship. In the case of 1982 law, and they also prohibited the construction of new mosque. as a result or as a response to this discrimination, some Muslims, a very small minority in terms of numbers, they try to demand ethnic rights and autonomy in addition to Islamic rights. So you have the Rohingya, the people who try to pursue these autonomous objectives. One of them is Rohingya Independence Force, 1964, had an alliance with the Mujahid Muslim National Liberation Party. You also had Rohingya Solidarity Organization, 1982. Again, they try to serve the ethnic demands and religious demands. Interestingly, there are quite a number of mosques in Burma. According to 2000 survey, about 2,600 mosques have been built in Burma. So it's quite a significant number. Actually, this number, 2,600 mosques, is quite the same amount of the number of mosques in the United States of America. According to some of the recent surveys, there are about 2,000 more mosques in the US. And there are about 1% Muslims, but between 5 to 10 million Muslims in the US. But anyway, just to give you some big picture. And Burma, there are minorities, and then they have mosque, and they have schools or madrasah schools. They tend to be apolitical. They focus on religious knowledge, and the government has yet to integrate the Islamic school into the national education system. Besides schools, you also have Islamic organization in Burma, and 400 is not bad in terms of the number of the Islamic organizations. So they try to engage different things, teaching, preachings, publishing, all kind of stuff that they can do according to their abilities and skills to pursue their objectives. So you do have Islamic organizations. The government, the Burmese government, tried to limit the number of Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, but they also help in terms of the management of the pilgrimage. Although the management of the pilgrimage is initiated by the people themselves, the Islamic organizations, and the government also, try to manage it in collaboration with the civil organizations, Islamic organizations. So the government, Islamic organizations, they have to arrange something about how to help Muslims in Burma to perform Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. You also have Burmese translation of the Arabic Quran in Burma. So this is prevalent in all kind of, or in different countries, of course. In Burma, also you have the Quranic translation in Burmese language. Of course, they need to understand the Quran in their own languages rather than in Arabic. Mostly Sunni, again, Sunni. When I say Sunni, S-U-N-N-I, the majority of Muslims in Southeast Asia are Sunni, okay? Those who believe that Abu Bakr was the rightful successor of the Prophet rather than Ali bin Abi Talib, his son-in-law and cousin. Then you had the election and rather than appointment in terms of political leadership. So that's the basic difference between the Sunni and the Shiite. So mostly in Southeast Asia, you have the Sunni Muslims, but you also have the Shiite Muslims, and you also have Shiite practices incorporated into the Sunni practices, like the celebration of birthday, the celebration of the birthday of the Prophet, and also the honoring of the family of the Prophet. That the Shiite would emphasize. You also have more educated Muslims who follow modern interpretation of Islam about jihad. You know, jihad is not only about physical struggle, but intellectual struggle, spiritual struggle, also gender equality, men and women. They try to also be critical of some of the customs or local customs and so on. So you also have this modern interpretation of Islam, even though they are minorities in terms of number. In Myanmar or in Burma, you have the Islamic Religious Affairs Council and also Islamic Council of Myanmar, and you also have Myanmar Muslim Organization. These organizations advocate what they call a modern Myanmar Islam. Islam as locally understood and practiced in Myanmar, but at the same time modern. So how do they modernize? Yeah, that's different ways. Try to use more rational understanding of the Quran, of the scripture, and also try to make science in line with Islam, or Islam in line with modern science, for example. You know, that's what they consider as modern, meaning science and religion are not contradiction. All right, that's Muslims in Burma or Myanmar. Let's move on. Islam in Cambodia. Islam in Cambodia, again, Muslim minorities, mostly Chams, have struggled to practice their religion amidst political upheavals, such as the genocide by the Pol Pot regime during the period 1975-1979. Belief in Allah was not compatible with submission to the Angkar, the supreme organization of the Khmer Rouge. So belief in God was not compatible with submission to the Angkar, the supreme organization of the Khmer Rouge, 1975-1979. Today, however, Muslims live more harmoniously in a Buddhist milieu. They have mosques, they have religious leaders, teachers, schools from different backgrounds, coming from different countries, from Cairo, Middle East, from Malaysia, from India. They have also asked assistance from the Islamic world through organizations such as the Organization of Islamic Congress. The kingdom, the old kingdom that was considered Muslim was the Cham kingdom, the Champa kingdom, 11th century. Interestingly, in Cambodia, Islam is officially recognized by both the Socialist Republic of Vietnam and the Kingdom of Cambodia, although as a religion associated with Cham ethnic minority, especially in Cambodia. So you have here Cambodia, you have Vietnam, yeah. So Cham, that's an ethnic group. Cham is ethnic group. And there are three groups in Cambodia: the Jaheed, the Cham, and the Chvea. Jaheed, pious devout, maybe Sufi mystic. They also have a Cham religious text in Cham script, around 23,000 people and 10% of Cambodian Muslims, and predominantly Shiite, right? The Sunni and the Shiite. Remember the Shiite or Shia, S-H-I-A, consider Ali, A-L-I, the rightful successor of the Prophet. And all the descendants of Ali were the imams, the spiritual leaders of the community, of the Shiite community. The Shiite means the followers of Ali, okay, who consider Ali was the leader, the spiritual leader, rather than Abu Bakr, Uthman, or Umar and Uthman in the case of the Sunni. So Jaheed, this is, yeah. Then you have the Cham without P, okay? The Cham over 80% of the Muslims. in Cambodia. They speak Khmer Islam. You also have the Muslims who are Khmer, ethnically Khmer. So you are Muslim who are ethnically Cham. You are, and then you have Jaheed, the Shiite. The Cham is mostly Sunni, and then the Khmer, so Muslim who are ethnically Khmer. Muslim who are ethnically Khmer, they also endorse Shafi'i. Shafi'i is the mainstream Islamic legal thought, as in other Southeast Asian countries. They are Malay and Javanese descent in terms of the ethnics. So you have a Sunni and the Shiite in Cambodia. And then you also have the different ethnic groups. Cham, Khmer. Cambodia Muslims have increased their political profile, although in Vietnam that we already talked about, when the Vietnamese communist mainstream culture and politics, they remain marginal. So the Cham, to be specific, that I already mentioned, one of the three groups in Cambodia, the Cham, they are Muslims, but also they are non-Muslim, because Cham is an ethnic identity. So the Cham Muslims are about 80% of the Cambodian Muslim. They are Sunni, they are reformists, they are using Malay and Arabic texts, and they speak both Cham and Khmer. All right. In Vietnam, 60,000 Muslims, 65,000 Muslims, 1% in Vietnam. In Vietnam, 52% Buddhist, and you also have significant Catholics in Vietnam. Cham Muslim, Malay Muslims, and other ethnic groups, Vietnamese Muslims. So Vietnamese Muslims, Cham ethnically or Malay ethnically, and also other ethnic groups like South Asians, Bangladeshi, Indian, and others. After the 1976 Socialist Republic of Vietnam, some 50,000 Muslims migrated to Malaysia. And then you also had the Vietnamization. This is interesting, Vietnamization of all the peoples. In other words, they need to endorse Vietnamese culture, and political ideology and so on. It's quite typical in different countries, not only in Vietnam. In Thailand, you also have Thaization, the notion of Thaization, making people Thai through education, through other programs. In Vietnam, you try to make people in all the diversity also Vietnamese, so Vietnamization. In Indonesia, you have Indianization. Right? In Malaysia, you have Malaysiization. So, like a national program, national, agenda, right? Try to make people nationalistic in terms of ideology, sometimes also in terms of religion, when religion is a national factor, an important national factor, then religion is embedded in this national program. It's a very interesting case of nationalism and religion, right? What is the relationship between religion and nationalism? Using Southeast Asian context, you can discuss very interesting dynamics of this relationship: nationalism and religions, majority religions and minority religions, how they interact with or relate national identities and programs and projects. Mosque in Ho Chi Minh City, about 50 more mosques, many migrants from Indonesia, India, the Middle East. You also have the Ho Chi Minh City Muslim Representative Committee. They have schools, they have halal food. The halal food. Halal food is the food that they can eat, Muslims can eat. In other words, if they have meat like goat or camel or cow or beef, so the beef or chicken, they can eat them if this meat was sacrificed or slaughtered in the name of God, for example, in the name of God, then it is considered halal. They consider this food or meat halal. Like in Jewish tradition, is kosher. So certain ways of slaughtering the animal to make it halal. But anyway, the halal food is also prevalent in Southeast Asia, including in places where there are minorities. In Vietnam and also in Cambodia, you have United Nations. The United Nations try to help and support minorities. And then the minority themselves try to make contact with wider Islamic countries, like in Middle East, or in the case of Southeast Asia, with Malaysia, with Indonesia. So they try to make connection and then try to ask for help. One of the organizations, the Khmer Islamic Association, in 1998, they serve or they voice political demands for Islamic and human rights issues. They also ask for funding, scholarship. They also try to practice some aspect of Islamic law, and so on and so forth. So in short, when we talk about Muslims in the Philippines, right, in Thailand, in Burma, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, where there are minorities, you have a quite diverse politics. Autonomy, right? They try to ask for autonomy or independence, separatist movement, some of them, but many of them actually try to either integrate or assimilate with, at least their integration. Integration meaning that they still keep the religious and cultural identity, but they become part of the citizens of the country. So that's integration. Assimilation, if you use the term assimilation, you can use for, referring to really culturally and even religiously assimilated, like blended into one main culture, umbrella culture. So that's assimilation. Usually the government try to make assimilation, if not integration. So integration, assimilation, autonomy, and independence, right? At least 4 different forms of politics when Muslims are minorities in Southeast Asia. Okay? To conclude about Muslims as minorities, they come from different ethnic groups, Malay ethnic groups, right? Like Cham Muslims, but you also have Burmese Muslim, Vietnamese Muslim, Khmer Muslims, Thai Muslims. They are minorities. They try to negotiate their ethnic identity with their religious, practice. So that's very, very complex. Ethnicity, nationalism, religion. Politics shape their expression, their religious Islamic expressions, politics. Efforts of resistance against an integration of Muslims to the Buddhist majority, in the case of Buddhist majority countries, and also Christian majority country, Catholic majority country like the Philippines. I don't really talk about Islamic art and cultures in this minority Islam cases. You do have Islamic art and cultures. They musics, they songs, they dances, performances, theaters, clothes, traditional clothes, food, all kind of stuff. We consider arts, artistic and cultural. You can find in Southeast Asia. Yeah. Okay, that's it. So I would like to just give you overview about Islam in Southeast Asia. Islam is one monolith, one monolithic, well, one name, right? But it has different and diverse manifestations. There is no one monolithic Islam in the world. Today, there are about 1.7 billion Muslims, second only to Christianity, 2.3 billions. And most Muslims today live in non-Arabic countries. So only 20% Muslim live in Arabic countries, like in the Middle East. Many Muslims live in Southeast Asia. Okay, the majority of them live in Indonesia and then Malaysia. And then the spread of Islam from India, from Yemen in the Middle East, from Cairo, from different places, even China, helps transmit Islam into Southeast Asia, at least from the 14th century, if we consider the evidence, historical and archaeological evidence, brought by Sufi mystics and also preachers, merchants, teachers, right? And then they intermarried with local women. You have Muslims in different places, from the ports to the inner part of islands, because this is an archipelago, and then you have mainland Southeast Asia. Islam didn't take root into mainland Southeast Asia, like, you know, Thailand, Burma, and so on, because it already had become Buddhist majority, and culturally and politically. So Islam instead went to island Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and southern Philippines, and part of the Philippines, because it's islands, and you have a desperate meaning scatter, yeah, scatter peoples. So you have this transmission of Islam into different ethnic groups. That's why Islam in Southeast Asia is very diverse ethnically. Yeah, Malay, Javanese, you know, you mentioned it also in the Philippines, Mindanao, Sulu, and so on, as well as in the mainland Southeast Asia, Chams, Khmer, and Burmese, and so on. So ethnically very, very diverse. So there is no one ethnic group. They are mostly non-Arabs, but they become Muslims through the history of Islamization. And then you had Islam and other cultures in Southeast Asia, you know, previously existing, like Hindu, Buddhist cultures, right? So Islam and other religions, you know, integrated or assimilated, or you have hybrid cultures. In some cases, Islam replaced Hindu, Buddhist cultures, but in other cases, you had you know, coexistence and hybrid culture of religions, of Islam and other religions. Then you had politics. Yeah, politics, the governments play a role in making whether or not Islam and how Islam is practiced. In Indonesia, you had Islam, the majority religion, but not the state religion. In Malaysia, Islam is about 60% of the population of Muslims, but Islam is the official religion. I don't really talk about Brunei Darussalam, one of the small Islamic monarchy, where you have also Muslim majority country and its monarchy. Then you have Islam as minorities, right? In Thailand, in Burma, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in the Philippines. And the kind of politics that they have would depend on whether or not they would like to integrate with the mainstream cultures, or they want to be autonomous, or they even want to be independent of the mainstream culture and politics. But the mainstream situation, it seems to me, this integration or accommodation of Islam into the main Buddhist or Christian, you know, ideologies and governments in Southeast Asia, right? So that's just an overview of Islam in Southeast Asia. And I already gave you some readings about this. If you are interested in studying particular aspect of Islam in Southeast Asia, just let me know, and I'll be there for to help you. All right, we have about 15 minutes left. If you had any question or comments about Islam in Southeast Asia, you can write in the chat, or you can talk now. Or if you had any question about your essay, you are welcome.
No, you are welcome.
That's a Siri.
Professor, I have a question about the essay.
Oh yeah, please.
If we were to write in APA format, are we required to use an abstract or no?
No, no.
Okay.
There is no, you don't need to write an abstract. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question, please? What kind of, okay, the question about exam, it's a midterm exam, so I will give you questions, yeah? Just wait for that. Oh, someone already submitted essay 5, good, that's fine. You know, that's fine. You can, if you want, you can, one of the 5 essays, you can develop it into your critical analysis essay if you feel like that's good enough for, you know, especially for the critical analysis essay. You can have a choice for that. Okay. So Andriana, if you already submitted SS5, that's fine. You still points. You get the points, the full points for that. All right, but thank you for that. Okay, Andriana. All right. Please, if you had any other questions or anything, let's see, or concerns. I have been reading your weekly essays, and mostly I already graded them, and maybe some of them are still need time to read them. But you know, please prepare and write your critical analysis essay for now, and write me questions or anything regarding your essay, critical analysis essay. Okay. All right, so attendance, please, if you haven't done so.